I know for sure that race played a role in his death.
Are you in the camp of if Nolan was white and his friends were...
Yeah.
Okay.
The friends, listen, they would have absolutely been under the jail with no questions asked first.
Really?
But for sure.
Okay.
We already know this. Like, we know how, I mean, think about it this way.
You're saying it's a done deal. If Nolan was white, his friends would be...
If Nolan was white, they would be in jail. They would ask questions later. It is the same thing that they do with anything else. When you look at law enforcement and how law enforcement treats a black person in general, a black person with no gun, they somehow get so scared that they end up dead. But you end up taking, say, a white racist killer who decided to go into a church and gun down a bunch of folk. They took Dylan Roof with no problems. We know that he was a known killer at the time, right? So, like, they fear black skin. And they treat black skin a lot differently when it comes to the criminal justice system.
You know, I'm sure some people out there will look at this and maybe think, like Jasmine Crockett doesn't know what she's talking about.
I know.
So to them, you have to say what?
They will walk a day in my shoes. That's what I have to say. I have lived it. I have seen it. I am someone who has been in the courtroom as a trained attorney doing criminal defense work as well as civil rights work. I know what bad policing looks like. I know what it looks like when communities are consistently under siege. And frankly, if you don't understand that we have race issues in this country, when just in 1 week, ICE has gunned down 2 people that they allegedly weren't even looking for, then you're not paying attention. They only did that because they were brown.
Here's the most significant new piece of this update. We finally have something that isn't someone's account of that day. We have data. 2 pieces of hard evidence have come out this week. The actual GPS tracking of the boat Nolan and his friends took to Horn Island, and a portion of the audio from the call his friends made on the way back. Not a retelling. Not a second-hand account filtered through a family member or a friend group. Instrument data and recorded audio. We're going to walk through exactly what that GPS data confirms, what that audio does and doesn't confirm, and, maybe most importantly, where the real gap in this timeline still sits, because narrowing a gap and closing a gap are 2 very different things. By the end of this, you'll know which one we're actually dealing with. Before we get into it, if you're new here, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because between the GPS release and whatever comes out of that grand jury referral, this case is not slowing down. If you've been here since the beginning, thank you genuinely. Drop your questions in the comments. We're reading them for the next update. Now let's get into what the data actually shows. Let's start with the boat itself, because this is the most concrete thing we've had in this entire case so far. According to data from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, reported by both NBC and ABC, the boat left its dock at approximately 9:56 a.m. on July 4th, and arrived at Horn Island around 11:14 a.m. straightforward so far. Here's where it gets more important. Nolan's friends have said they last saw him around 3 p.m. Other accounts place that last sighting as late as 4 p.m. The boat itself didn't leave Horn Island until 4:31 p.m., after which it returned to its original dock at 5:44 p.m., moved into Fort Bayou around 5:52 p.m., came back to the dock at 6:06 p.m., then went to Fort Bayou's boat launch at 7:19 p.m., before being towed overland to the boat owner's residence. Now, a grounding note, because this is exactly the kind of data that's easy to overread. This is instrument tracking. It tells us where the boat physically was and when. It does not tell us what happened to Nolan, and it does not, on its own, tell us who was doing what on that island in the hours before departure. What it does do is give us a hard timestamp to measure every account against. And that's genuinely useful, even if it isn't a full answer by itself. Now let's slow all the way down on this audio, because out of everything released this week, this is the piece most likely to get chopped into a 10-second clip and stripped of context. So we're going to walk through exactly what's on it, exactly how it was described by the outlets that obtained it, and exactly where the line is between what it shows and what people are going to want it to show. Tonight, new audio surfaced shedding light on the moments before some of Nolan's friends left the island off the coast of Mississippi. According to the reporting around this release, a mother connected to the case has said the boat left without Nolan when it began malfunctioning on the way back. That's the framing attached to this audio by the outlet that obtained it, not our own conclusion, but worth stating clearly because it's the context the clip is being released alongside. In the recording itself, you hear one of the friends say plainly, "We're sinking, please help." That's followed by someone, it sounds like whoever's coordinating the towing assistance on the other end of that call, asking a direct follow-up question, "Is everybody in good health otherwise?" And the response is short. Yeah, everybody's on board. That's the entire confirmed content of that audio. A boat taking on water. A call placed for towing assistance. A confirmation that everyone physically on that boat at that moment was present and unhurt. Here's what we need to say clearly, because this is exactly the kind of clip that gets stretched past what it actually establishes. This audio confirms two things and two things only: that the boat had a real, physical, mechanical problem on the return trip, and that the group aboard that boat was accounted for and in good health when that call was placed. That's it. It does not tell us anything about what happened on the island in the hours before that call. It doesn't tell us who was standing where at 3 p.m. or 3:30, or whenever the actual last sighting of Nolan took place. A boat sinking on the way home is a separate, confirmed fact. What happened to Nolan before that boat ever left the dock is still the open question this entire case is built around. We can't let the drama of one collapse into the mystery of the other, even though it's tempting because they happened at different points in the same day and they are not the same story. It's also worth noting what this audio doesn't settle about Nolan specifically. His body was found 2 days later. As of the most recent reporting, it's still unclear whether he was with anyone at all when he disappeared. That's a genuinely open question, and this audio, as dramatic as it sounds, doesn't move the needle on it either way. Now here's a question we've been sitting with for weeks, finally getting a clearer answer. Why exactly is the FBI involved in this case? As mentioned in earlier updates, the FBI joined this case, and in fact, according to a report from the Sun Herald, they were revealed to have been helping local authorities early on, well before it became public knowledge. And the specific reason given is more concrete than anything we'd had before. It's because Horn Island is federal property. That's worth sitting with for a second because it reframes the entire question of federal involvement. This isn't a story about the FBI stepping in because a case got too big or too politically visible. It's a jurisdictional fact. If something happens on federal land, federal agencies having a role in the response isn't unusual. It's closer to procedure. The article goes further and lays out what the FBI's role actually looks like in practice. It states they'll specifically be looking at forensic examination of the digital evidence investigators have collected. Based on general research into how that kind of forensic work typically operates, these findings can include smartphone tracking through cell phone towers, deleted files, deleted messages, social media activity, and more. That's a meaningful list, especially given how much of this case has already turned on questions about a phone the parents believe had content removed from it. Now, the grounding distinction we made in the last update still holds, and honestly, it holds even more firmly now that we have this new detail. Confirmed FBI involvement, even involvement that started earlier than the public knew, is still not the same thing as a formal federal takeover of this case. What's changed is that we now have a specific jurisdictional reason for that involvement, instead of just a general sense that federal agencies sometimes help out with digital forensics. Federal land ownership is a concrete fact. It explains the contact. It does not, by itself, tell us anything about what the digital evidence actually contains, or what conclusions anyone should draw from Nolan's death. Those are two different things, and it's worth keeping them separate even as the story develops. It's also worth remembering separately what a local district attorney has said about a related but distinct piece of this: the handling of the investigation itself. A local district attorney has stated that certain investigative steps, like reviewing a phone or requesting digital records, are standard practice whenever a cause of death is unknown. That's not, in his framing, an indication of a crime. It's worth holding both of these points side by side. Federal involvement tied to federal land is one fact, and standard investigative procedure for an undetermined cause of death is a separate, unrelated fact. Neither one confirms the other, and neither one should be read as proof of wrongdoing on its own. Last piece of hard fact before we move into what's still unresolved, and this one isn't complicated, it's just something worth marking clearly because the language around it has shifted. Earlier reporting referred to the funeral only in general terms. Next week, a homegoing celebration still being finalized. That's no longer where things stand. Nolan Wells' funeral is now set for July 20th, in his hometown of Ocean Springs, Mississippi at Center Point Church. That's a real date now, not a placeholder. And for a family that has spent weeks fielding press conferences, GoFundMe questions, and public speculation in place of actual answers, that's worth acknowledging on its own terms, separate from anything happening in the investigation. As his mother put it earlier in this process, Nolan would not want people sitting around crying and eating. So what they're planning alongside the funeral service itself is something closer to a celebration of who he was. That's not a detail that moves the investigation forward in any way. But it's a real date on a real calendar for a family that's been living without one for weeks. It deserves to be stated plainly without being folded into the analytical parts of this update. We'll come back to what this means for the broader timeline once we get into what's still unresolved. Specifically, that narrower window between the last confirmed sighting of Nolan and the boat's eventual departure from the island. That's next. Before we move into what's still unresolved, it's worth restating what came out of the Crump press conference, because none of it has changed, and a few of these details are easy to lose track of as new information keeps arriving. The family met with District Attorney Angel McGrath, and she told them directly that this case will go to a grand jury once the investigation is complete. Both sides have agreed to a mutual inspection of the cell phone, the family's own experts and the DA's experts reviewing it together at the same time, so there's no asymmetry in who sees what and when. The independent autopsy is being conducted separately in Washington, D.C., with Colin Kaepernick covering that cost. Tyler Perry has covered funeral expenses. Reverend Al Sharpton is set to officiate the service on July 20th. Attorney Eric Hers also put a specific, checkable legal fact on the record. Under Mississippi law, a victim's family is generally entitled to receive an incident report within 72 hours. As of that press conference, the family said they still hadn't received it, and that getting it was part of the reason for that meeting in the first place. And one more thing worth restating because it keeps resurfacing in public commentary as if it's still an open question. It isn't. The family has been consistent repeatedly that when they repost content, including that widely circulated pool photo, they are not authenticating it. They're asking the public if anyone recognizes it or knows something about it. That's a meaningful distinction, and it's one the family has made a point of clarifying more than once. Now let's get into the part of this update that the GPS data actually changes, because it does change something, just maybe not what people are hoping it changes. Here's the core timing gap, and this is worth sitting with carefully, because the new data sharpens it rather than closing it. Nolan's friends have said their last contact with him was around 3 p.m. Other accounts push that last sighting later to around 4 p.m. We now know from the GPS data itself that the boat didn't actually leave Horn Island until 4:31 p.m. Do the math on that for a second. If the 4 p.m. sighting is the accurate one, that leaves a window of roughly 30 minutes between when someone last saw Nolan and when that boat actually pulled away from the island. That's a meaningfully narrower gap than the vague, sometime in the afternoon, framing this case has operated under for weeks. It's also, and this needs to be said plainly, not a closed gap. 30 minutes unaccounted for on a crowded island with people moving around, boats coming and going, is still 30 minutes where multiple things could plausibly have happened, none of which we have direct confirmation of yet. I want to say this as clearly as I can. Narrowing a window and eliminating a window are two entirely different things. The GPS data is genuinely useful. It gives investigators, and frankly all of us trying to follow this honestly, a hard boundary to measure every other account against. But a 30-minute window is still a window. It is not an answer. Next, the disputed audio that Crump's team raised in an earlier press conference. The claim that a recording captured Nolan saying something like, "This is my phone, what are you doing?" This remains exactly where it was last update, unresolved. One witness told Crump's team that was Nolan's voice. Another witness came forward and disputed that identification entirely. Crump's team has said their own audio review is ongoing, and they've acknowledged on the record that they need to be more careful going forward about how they attribute specific claims to unnamed witnesses. That's actually a meaningful admission. It's a legal team publicly correcting its own process, and that's worth giving them credit for, even as we keep this claim firmly in the unverified column until there's an actual conclusion from that audio review. And finally, the Katie question remains where it was. Her account, relayed through her sister's Facebook post and confirmed publicly by her mother, Gracie McCormick, describes Katie believing Nolan was heading back toward the boat after their conversation ended. The friend's account, relayed through Crump, describes Nolan choosing to stay behind with her instead. Both of these are still secondhand. Neither has been independently confirmed as the final verified word on what happened after the two of them parted ways. The GPS release doesn't touch this part of the story at all. It tells us about a boat's location, not about a conversation on a beach. Now, the part where we have to be the most careful, because the new federal property detail has already started generating conclusions online that the reporting itself doesn't support. With Horn Island now confirmed as federal property, some online commentary has jumped straight to the idea that this automatically means a full federal criminal investigation is underway. We need to flag that clearly as an overreach. Federal land jurisdiction explains why federal agencies would be looped in for investigative assistance. That's a jurisdictional fact. It does not, by itself, establish that federal criminal investigators have opened their own separate case into Nolan's death. Those are two different things wearing similar language, and it's easy to collapse them if you're moving fast through a headline. We're also going to keep flagging, without repeating as established fact, the theories about deleted social media accounts functioning as evidence of coordinated concealment. That's a pattern people have noticed. It is not, on its own, confirmed motive or confirmed wrongdoing. Representative Jasmine Crockett's on-record comments belong here too, presented as exactly what they are, her stated opinion, not a case finding. She's been direct that she can't say whether race played a role in Nolan's death itself, but she's argued it's fair to question whether race shaped how quickly law enforcement characterized this as no foul play suspected. That's a legitimate question to raise publicly. It's not a proven fact about this specific case. On the other side of that same conversation, the family's football coach has said publicly he never saw racial tension among the teens involved. Neither statement cancels the other out. They're two honest, on-record impressions sitting side by side, and it's the actual investigation, not public commentary, that will eventually sort out what any of it means. Last one, and we'll keep saying this until something changes it. There's commentary online alleging a specific judge influenced the deletion of evidence or social media accounts. We have found no on-record support for that claim anywhere in the reporting we've reviewed. That's a theory being floated. It is not a claim we're going to repeat as if it's established. Let's zoom out again for a second because there's useful general context that applies here. As we mentioned in the last update, a CNN law enforcement analyst, a former police chief in both Philadelphia and Washington, D.C., has explained why individual witness interviews matter more than group interviews in a case like this. Separating witnesses removes the pressure that comes from people unconsciously aligning their account with what others in their group have already said. His broader point still holds too. Nothing about a multi-week timeline in a case like this is actually unusual, even though the public pressure surrounding it makes it feel that way. Here's the new piece of general context worth adding, given what we now know about Horn Island. Federal land ownership routinely brings federal agencies into local investigations for jurisdictional and forensic reasons. This is closer to standard procedure than exception. It's the same ordinary, not extraordinary framing we applied to the initial FBI contact a couple of updates ago, just with a clearer, more specific reason behind it now. Underneath the data and the disputes, this is still a family preparing to bury their son. The homegoing celebration is set for July 20th at Center Point Church in Ocean Springs, with visitation, the funeral service, and a separate celebration of life repass at the Jackson County Fairgrounds. Media has been given access, with the family asking that the repass itself stay primarily for family and close friends. And they've repeated their direct request. If there are protests even on the day of the service, they're asking that it remain peaceful. The family's asks of the public haven't changed either. Keep the tips coming. They've said publicly that response has genuinely helped move things forward. Don't treat every repost on their social media as authenticated evidence. They've been consistent about labeling what is and isn't confirmed. And to Nolan's friends specifically, they've asked people to take care of their mental health, recognizing this has been enormously difficult for everyone close to him, not just for them. And through all of it, the parents' framing hasn't shifted. They're not asking for a predetermined outcome. They're asking for a thorough, unbiased investigation, and whatever answers actually come from one. So, where does this actually leave things? Confirmed. The full GPS timeline of the boat, the released audio of the malfunction call, and the confirmation everyone aboard was accounted for, FBI assistance tied specifically to Horn Island's federal status. The funeral now set for July 20th, and the grand jury referral alongside the mutual cell phone inspection. Still just a claim. The exact final window before the boat's confirmed 4:31 p.m. departure, and the competing second-hand accounts of what was actually said between Nolan and Katie before they parted ways. Still theory, not fact. The idea that race shaped how this case was initially handled, the speculation around deleted accounts, and any assumption that federal land jurisdiction alone means a federal criminal investigation has opened. We're going to keep following this case. We'll bring you those facts as we actually get them and not a moment before. If you want to stay with this story as it develops, subscribe and we'll see you in the next update.
Just say for those of you, again, if you are having protests, even the day of his service, I am asking you guys to just keep it peaceful. Nolan would never want any type of violence or anything like that. He was not that kind of person. So if you guys would, again, just be peaceful. And to the community, thank you so much. just the outpouring of love, support. We've had some local officials. Mayor Casey Vaughn from Gaucher has reached out to us. Oh my gosh, I can't even tell you. He has, it's almost been every day. He's been texting to check on us. Also, Jeffrey Hullum, thank you so much. He's been texting pretty much every day. Receiving a lot of stories from Nolan's teachers, which just warms my heart, his classmates, teammates. So again, for those of you who have donated to the GoFundMe, once again, I stress, if you are not financially able to, we're not begging for that money, okay? If you're not financially able to, we understand. We thank you for whatever you can give, but if you cannot, if you would, just keep us in your prayers.